Hello and welcome to our new part of the Intro to Linguistics. This time we're dealing with sociolinguistics, or how does our environment influence our language? First, we have to deal with an awful lot of terminology. I'm really sorry for the boring slides. There was nothing I could do, and there are a lot of terms we have to look at. I did my best, so let's dive right into it. First, we have to talk about different varieties and lects. So variety is just a general term for a specific form of language in terms of grammar, in terms of vocabulary, in terms of pronunciation, everything, as opposed to an accent, which is only a way of referring to the pronunciation of a certain variety. So you can say that an accent is a variety that only differs from what's known as the standard in terms of pronunciation. Then we have a dialect, which is also known as diatopic variation. And this is just regional variation. For example, in Germany, we have something that's called Lower Bavarian, which is specific to Lower Bavaria. We have Saxon, which is specific to Saxony. And you also have that in English-speaking areas. For example, Liverpudlian or the Geordie accent. And Geordie also has its own words, I think. So it should be a dialect as well, because a dialect differs from the standard in every way, in terms of vocabulary, grammar, accent, or pronunciation. You name it, you have it. Then we also have the sociolect, which is diastratic variation. And as opposed to the dialect, this is not limited to a certain region, but it's rather a variation among a certain social group or class. And like a dialect, you have some vocabulary differences, you have grammar differences, you have pronunciation, again, all levels. And then you have the idiolect. An idiolect is just an individual person's way of speaking. So you might use some words as a collocation that other people wouldn't use as a collocation. You might have a certain way of pronouncing a word, and all that also comes together as an idiolect. So again, grammar, vocabulary, pronunciation, everything. And then we have variation according to the situation. And there we can differentiate between functional variation, which is diaphasic variation. For example, when you just code switch between two different varieties, because once you're with your family and in another situation you're with your friends and you speak differently then. Or of course, register and style. Say you have an appointment with somebody at an office, and there you would rather use a formal register, whereas when you just meet with your friends for a pint at the pub, you would not use the same kind of formal way of speaking that you used with that guy at the office. Now, I've mentioned the standard a couple of times. So what actually makes the standard of a language the standard? There are a few things that you have to keep in mind with the standard. First, it's prestigious. So when somebody speaks the standard language, that comes with a certain good reputation. And also the standard is codified, so you will find grammar books and vocabulary lists, dictionaries, all that on the standard. Moreover, the standard is the official language of a country. For example, you have in Germany High German as your standard language and also as the official language. And the standard is commonly used in education as well, and also taught to foreigners. So when we learn English here in Germany, we learn one of the standards. We don't learn Geordie, we don't learn Irish English, which isn't the full standard outside of Ireland yet. It's getting there. So we learn either RP or General American normally. And then we have public and written usage as our final point. So the media communicate with the population in the standard language, most of them. You have books printed in the standard language, this is also the variety that you write if you write a letter or anything, at least if you write formally in texts, it's a different story. So now let's get into diatopic variation in English. And let's start with what variations can we find across the globe? So first we have to address that English is a pluricentric language. So we have the two established standards of received pronunciation in the UK and General American in the US. As you can see in the top line, native language, the first two flags, those are the most established standards. But then we also have English as a native language in Canada, in Australia, in New Zealand, and in South Africa. And then English as the only official language, so not as the native language necessarily, but as the only official language in the country. There are just a few examples. We have Zimbabwe, we have Ghana, Jamaica, Nigeria. So you can find this in a lot of countries in Africa that used to be colonized by the UK, for example, where English is still the only official language. And then English can have another status as well. So it can be one of several official languages. For example, in India or in Singapore or in the Philippines, English is just one of a few official languages. As I've just mentioned, received pronunciation, or RP in short, is the standard in the United Kingdom. And RP is not really a diatopic variation, at least not inside of the UK, because in the UK it's mainly a sociolect. So it's associated with upper class, it is very prestigious, and it's not limited to a particular region of the UK. And in fact, it's only spoken by 3 to 5% of the British population only. But that's a ridiculously low number, actually. And of course, received pronunciation comes with its own phonology. Some of you, or in fact, most of you, will probably learn to transcribe it one day in phonology class. At least in LMU, 3/4 of phonology classes are on RP. So let's dive into phonology here. RP is non-rhotic, so you don't pronounce post-vocalic R. Here my example is the word car, which is ka in RP. Sorry for my bad RP. Then they use the clear L before vowels and the dark L in all other positions. I'll do my best to say clear with a clear L, but again, sorry for my bad RP. Then you have U after the phonemes T, D, N, S, Z, and the voiceless TH. And there you have new as an example, which otherwise would be new and not new. Then you have the phoneme A as in father before nasals and voiceless fricatives. My example here is dance, which of course we'll get to GA later, but there it would be dance. And you have the so-called pot sound, which exists only in RP as compared to GA, not mentioning any other emerging standards here. So it's just the two of them that I'm comparing. And another example other than pot would be hot. And last but not least, you have differences in the word stress patterns. So in RP, secondary stress is largely unimportant. You would call a lab in its long form laboratory. So it's just the first one is the first syllable stressed and everything else just falls down. You also have vocabulary differences in RP. So I'll just go through the list and try to explain. It feels a bit like a taboo game. So we have the season that comes after summer is called autumn in RP. The space where you walk along the road is called pavement. The big vehicles that goods are transported in through the country are called lorries. And when you send something in the post. Yeah, you send it in the post. And if you go up and down in a building and you're too lazy to use the stairs, you use the lift. And when you fill up your car, you use petrol. And the U6, for example, is underground. We'll get to GA later. And we also have differences in grammar and in orthography. So let's go to orthography first. So when you write the word color, you have OU in the last syllable. And of course, there are other words as well, like savior, for example, you also have OUR at the end. Then when you write center or theater, you have RE at the end, not ER. When you write words ending in "ize", like realize, idealize, anything like that, you write with the "ize" with an S. And when you have words like traveling, you write them with two L's. Or also fulfill, that should be with two L's in both positions. Again, I don't write like that, so sorry for my bad RP. Grammar is another important point. There we only have two examples here. We have the sentence, they insisted that she went. So we can see we don't use the mandative subjunctive, which I will explain when we get to its actual usage in GA. And when we say, when we use the verb get, it's get, got. So we say, I had got a cold. We'll get to the difference to GA in a minute. Okay, General American. I've talked about it so much already, and I'm much more at home here, so this should be better. GA refers to a variety that doesn't have features of the Southern or Eastern accent in the US, because both of these are pretty strong, and you don't find them in GA. And it's not a homogeneous accent, it's just a group of all varieties that don't have said features. And in contrast to RP, which is spoken by basically nobody, GA is spoken by 2/3 of the US population. In terms of phonology, we have a rhotic accent here. So R is pronounced in all positions. Where we had ka before, we now have car. Then you have the dark L in all positions. So we have clear, really with a dark L also in front of vowels and not just at the end of syllables or words. Then we have not U after the list of phonemes shown here, but just U. So new, not new. And before nasals and voiceless fricatives, we use the cat vowel instead of a father A, so we end up with dance. And again, we have the word stress patterns as a difference, because in American English, we have a lot of secondary stress retention. So the laboratory, which I think still have too much secondary stress in it, is a laboratory, really. There was a little too much, but I tried to emphasize it, so I think you get the point. When you have a secondary word stress in a word, you will pronounce it in General American and you will just drop that syllable altogether in RP. And last but not least, we have the flapped T. So in American English, when you have a T in front of a syllable that is not stressed, then the T becomes a bit like D. So it doesn't quite get there, but it's a mixture of T and D. Sometimes it vanishes basically altogether. For example, in winter would be winner, basically with no T at all anymore. Or the atom would be atom in generally American. And getting to vocabulary, these are the same words that I used for RP before. So again, the season after summer is fall. The space where you walk along the road is the sidewalk. And the thing that's used to deliver goods, the big vehicle, is a truck. And you don't send stuff in the post, but in the mail. And when you're too lazy for the stairs, you use the elevator. And when you fill up your car, you use gas. And the U6 in Munich is a subway line in GA. Of course, these things aren't exclusive. They're just a tendency. So you will probably hear both words used in both varieties, but the likelihood is larger for the words that are listed here for each variety. Getting to orthography, when we look at color here, we see that the U, which is there in RP, is not there in General American. So it's just OR, well, also in Savior. And then when we look at center or theater, we have ER, not RE. And looking at words like realize, ending in eyes, we see that eyes is written with a Z, not an S. And then the double L in traveling becomes one L also in fulfill, for example, or in all right, you only have one L. Grammar-wise, we now get to the mendative subjunctive. They insisted that she go is an example. And you can see that you don't have a third person S, it's just the infinitive that's there for the verb go. And you use this with anything that's like a suggestion or a piece of advice. And here we have insist, which is more like a suggestion. And then you just use the infinitive, no past marker, no personal marker, no nothing. So it's just infinitive after the subject. And that's actually something that's getting more and more common in the US again, and seems to have a bit of an overspill into English in the UK as well. And secondly, the verb get is just one example of a few other forms that are irregular in American English, which are not irregular in British English. And here we have, I had gotten a cold. So we have get, got, gotten. And another example would be dive. Dive, dove, dove. In General American, dive, dived, dived. In RP, most of these forms are analogous to other verbs, for example, get, got, gotten, forget, forgot, forgotten. You see where it's coming from. Now, after all this RP and GA business, we are now getting to diastratic variation or sociolect. And first we have to determine the basics. So here we don't have any distinction according to geographical background. It's just according to social class. And there are a lot of motivating factors. So basically you have education as a factor, you have the socioeconomic status of a person as a contributing factor, a person's ethnicity, their gender, their age, and of course also their profession, because certain businesses or certain professions, they have their own lingo with their own words and their own ways of expressing certain things. So it also matters in sociolects. And there was one big groundbreaking study in sociolinguistics, which has to be mentioned here, and this is Labov's department store study. So William Labov was interested in the change of New York's rhoticity, because New York, with its position at the Atlantic and also close to New England and all that, they changed their rhoticity quite a bit, actually. And after World War II, rhoticity was creeping back in. So New York English was non-rhotic before that, and after World War II, it came back. And William Labov was interested in studying that. So he went to 3 different department stores, one for each social group. So we had working class, middle class, upper class. And then he did something like indicated in the speech bubble below, and would ask a clerk for an item that he knew was on the 4th floor. And the clerk, as expected, would answer that the item is on the 4th floor. And then Labov would pretend not to have understood. So he wanted to make the clerk repeat it to make a more formal situation out of it, or to make the clerk think about his words more, or their words. And he said, "I'm sorry, what was that again?" Something like that. And the clerk said again, "the 4th floor." And then he looked at the results of the study and found that in fact the upper class was much more likely to be rhotic in the, I think it was late 60s or early 70s when he did that. And working class wasn't really rhotic yet. And apparently this was reflected in the clerks of the department store where these classes tended to go shopping. Now, we talked about code switching according to the situation or diaphasic variation before, and this is going to be our last topic for today. And the prime example is slang as informal language, which we of course don't use with anyone. So if we have an official appointment, we normally don't speak slang because we want to be clear, we want to be understood, and this is a formal situation. And in slang, we have different words or phrases from conventional forms. In fact, many new words are coined in slang all the time. And this kind of slang serves as a group identity marker. So if you speak it, you show that you belong to, say, young people in a certain area who use certain phrases and certain words. And if you speak like that, you show, hey, I'm one of you. And as I said, words are coined all the time, often in a very creative way. And we have tons of neologisms in slang. But slang is also something where words die quickly. So they are coined quickly, and once they become too mainstream, they're not cool anymore, so they're dropped. And this is something very typical of slang. And my example for that I brought you is Cockney rhyming slang, where common words are replaced by phrases of 2 or 3 words, and the last word of these 2 or 3 rhymes with the original word. And if we get to a very advanced stage, the rhyming word is left out, so you really, really, really have to know your slang. Otherwise, you don't get a thing. If we look at here, these examples here, we have the house, which is the Mickey Mouse, or in the advanced stage, just the Mickey. And then we have the queen, baked bean, or just baked. And the wife, trouble and strife, or just trouble. So you really see Cockney rhyming slang is something you have to know, or you have to be familiar with to get the picture when somebody speaks it very strongly. And with these hopefully entertaining examples, we have made it through sociolinguistics. And next week, we're going to deal with history of English as our very last topic of the term. See you then.